Maybe if you could just reflect a little bit. I know that Ella Baker, who you mentioned earlier, of course, and Bayard were two figures who were, I think, in some ways transitional figures between the SNCC people and the quote-unquote, I may be answering my own question here, the quote-unquote more established leaders of the movement. Can you talk a little bit about what it was about them that attracted the students to them? And
well, they were different. Bayard was an advisor.
Could you stay on the record, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. Bayard was an advisor, an adult advisor to SNCC. Ella Baker was the spirit of SNCC. You know, Ella would sit in our meetings that went on for hours and hours and hours. She'd wear a face mask because everyone smoked and Ella didn't smoke. You know, and she'd sit there, just sit there and listen and listen. She wouldn't talk, she'd just listen. So we'd have to ask Ella a question, and then maybe she'd give us an answer. But Bayard, on the other hand, was Bayard was an intellectual. I'm not saying Ella wasn't an intellectual, she was, but Bayard was an intellectual, a scholar, he was an opera singer. Bayard was so many things, you know, but he was also important because he respected SNCC's space, where it was what it was trying to do. Ella was in that space. I mean, she was the mother, you know, nurturing her children. And, you know, Bayard wasn't that. But I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but they were very, very important.
What were their leftist connections? Because it seems to me that without having, I haven't studied this, but somewhere around there were these left perspectives, certainly in Bayard Rustin, but also I think around Ella Baker. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, you know, I'm not going to get into that, get that trap, but you know, you read The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual. You know, oh, you have it sitting there? Oh, yeah. No, I'm talking about in terms of left.
Okay,
You know?
radical democratic visionary.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, left means a lot of things. I mean, Bayard was a socialist, but you know, Ella obviously was a political progressive. I would not box Ella into ideological politics, but she believed that people had the right to speak for themselves. Ella's quote is, "Strong people don't need strong leaders." You know, so she felt if the community was strong, it didn't need strong leaders. It could create its own leadership and move forward with that. And so,
the reason I raise that question is not to index them ideologically. I raised the issue earlier in our conversation about notions of transformative democracy and inventing new perspectives. There's a narrative across Latin America now that goes from left to classical capitalism called participatory democracy. That's an old philosophy. Michael Manley may have been the first to try to bring it at level of scale at a nation. The issue
but that was a term in the 60s too, in the Civil Rights Movement.
Right, and it's a philosophical term that goes way back. But the reason that I raise it is, I think it's really important for your generation not only to work in the box and to do progressive reform, but to think about where the world is going. The world is not going to always be the way that our generations understood it, and your parents and your grandparents' generation understood it. And this is not about going to textbook A or textbook B and taking this theory or that theory and trying to sit it down. But it is saying to you, do not inhabit. And that's what, and the Civil Rights Movement, I think, is a great example. Black people said, we are no longer going, in fact, we had been working on that from the minute we got off the boat. We are no longer going to inhabit this space the way that it is. And we're going to transform it. And we did transform it, and in that context, we helped to transform the nation. And the non-black people who were involved in that were a part of that transformation. Not, in some ways, you can see them as allies, but I think people can tell you stories where they were also, many of them were central to the narrative. We live in a paralyzed democracy. You see what's going on, surveillance, so forth. The questions, I think, for you is not just how you tinker within the box. We have to do that. But should it be a box? Should it be a triangle? And that's just not a national question here in the United States. The most dynamic region in the world struggling with the dominant structures of the world are right here in these Americas. And so I would urge you not to just be great policy analysts and researchers and legislators, but start to think and try to live new ways. The gay, lesbian, transgender movement is along with the Latino movement, I think, are the fundamental democratic movements of this period that are going to run through this century and now forever, which are changing the nature of how we understand what is standard, acceptable sociology. Whether my ethical values like it or not, it has changed. Whether white people who said, I will never live next to those ends, and their daughters are now, and granddaughters are walking around with little brown babies and whatnot, that they are now embracing and loving, that's transformation. So that's one of the lessons that I think comes out of this great movement. It was not just any movement, it was a movement that changed the very sociological nature of the society. And I think that's your charge, is to figure out in this generation, what are those fundamental barriers to new perspectives about democracy, not looking in a textbook to try to find it, but drawing from the lessons of these movements.
That sounds like a good way to end tonight. I want to thank everybody for coming. This has been a great discussion. Ivanhoe or Janet, do you want a last word?
No, I think you could have the last word.
All right. Anyway, so thanks very, very much. I think this was a great conversation. I want to thank all three of you. Walter, I'll add you to the list, all four of you, for sharing your perspectives. I think we learned a lot. I mean, we didn't have a kind of year-by-year history of the civil rights movement. There are a lot of books where you can get that, but what we got was some of the essence of how people viewed it and lived it and understood it, and I think that's a wonderful thing.